Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Intel. Sure, the M1 chip is fast, but is it big and hot? Check and mate. Episode 229, Building an App for Web and Mobile with Expo.
Mazen or Robin, are you two skiers? Like, do you go skiing wintertime up on the mountains?
Definitely not.
No.
Have you ever gone skiing, or is that just like you went and you don't like it?
I went as a kid, like, I guess I was like middle school, high school I went. And my friend's dad taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And I got as far as like the green hills. And then I wiped out bad enough that my skis came off and went down the hill a little ways. And after that, I was kind of over it. And I've never really been since then. Don't really have a desire to go again because my joints have only gotten worse since childhood.
It can be a brutal sport. What about you, Mazen? Have you been skiing before?
So I've gone twice. Bear in mind, I grew up in Africa. Didn't really get to see snow till about 18 years old when I moved to the U.S. When I went, I was told that, all the slopes are open when I got to the top. Meanwhile, it was only the Black Diamond and whatever the one right underneath it is. So I had two horrible experiences going down. Luckily, the second time I went, there was a friend of a friend that was with us, and he was an NCAA skier. So I basically kind of like rode his back the whole way down.
Yeah.
He just like helped me
That's
down.
a friend right there.
Exactly. Safe to say, if my kid or kids ever want to go skiing, I'll be watching them from the cabin.
There you go. That's what I said. I was like, if Travis, my husband, wants to take my kids skiing, that's fine. I will sit in the lodge.
I'll go tubing. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, sledding and tubing are fun.
Very, very fun. And they're a lot more like accessible to everybody else. Yeah, we have this tradition. My wife and I and our family have this tradition to go up to a cabin up on Mount Hood here near Portland and go skiing. Well, I mean, the kids don't go skiing. They tend to sit in the cabin and drink, hot cocoa, which is great. I actually I tried like snowboarding once and had a horrible experience, like Robin just fell and hit my head. And I was just like, this is stupid. But my wife she loves skiing. So she convinced me to go and actually try it this time skiing. And, 2 years ago, I guess. And so we did that. And I loved it. And one of I'll tell you, here's my secret. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos before I went. Like there's a ton of YouTube videos about beginner skiing. And I just watched like an hour. My kids were like, are you seriously still watching skiing? But I did that. And then I didn't fall down once. Of course, I was just on, the Buttercup Hill. And I think I went on the next one up like once, and that was scary. But I just did that, snow plowing my way down every time. And then this time my son went too. He's 17, Cedric. And so we went together while Kyra went way up to the top of Black Diamond or whatever she does. And we just kind of snow plowed our way down. I started getting where I could carve a little bit and do some things. So it was kind of fun and didn't fall down again. So kind of happy about that. It was fun. I love it. It's like being up on the mountain where it's like cold and silent, and there aren't too many people up there.
It is very quiet. Snow has that quality.
Yeah, it has that quality, and it's getting dark, but there's lights, and you're up there, just this peaceful like snow coming down. So I am gonna introduce our guest in a bit here, but I want to ask him because I want him to be part of this conversation. Josh, have you been skiing?
I have, and it was just as bad as all of y'all's experiences. in my 20s, went down, first time going down, did the pizza shape so long that my muscles were entirely exhausted, and I couldn't learn to actually kind of ski, and walked halfway down and never have done it again.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I feel like that's a common thing. I think if people like first off, watch all those YouTube videos.
You can learn anything on YouTube.
Yeah, you can learn anything on YouTube. You'll get really good. And literally, like the one I watched started with, here is how you buckle your ski boots. Like that was how basic it was. But you know what? Like if you don't know how to buckle your ski boots, you might have a bad time. And that's actually like start small, go down the bunny hill, go down, Buttercup, stay on that thing for the full first day. Like don't even try the other ones. Just do that. Be like Josh and like, just snowplow your way down. And then eventually start like figuring out other stuff. I don't know. It's pretty cool. But I've only been twice, so I can't like be like, oh yeah, I'm some expert here. Anyway, let's get into this. I am Jamon Holmgren, your host, friendly CTO of Infinite Red. Clearly, I am an Olympic class skier, and I am joined today by my dandy co-hosts.
Hey.
Dandy, of course, in the positive sense.
I was going to say, I was like, which meaning of dandy are we talking about here?
We're digging deep into the barrel.
Knowing you, it's the positive one.
It's the positive one. Yeah, we're digging deep into the barrel, the bottom of the barrel of these positive adjectives. So you're going to have to kind of use your imagination a little bit. Robin, of course, and Mazen, and this mysterious former co-host who I will introduce in a bit here. Robin is a senior software engineer located in Portland, Oregon, works at Infinite Red, specializes in React Native. What's up, Robin?
Oh, not much. Just, recording a podcast. I did get more sleep last night than I have.
That's good.
So feeling good.
Nice.
So Peter's like kind of, okay, well, is it that Peter's getting more sleep or is like Travis?
Peter's getting more
like,
sleep.
Taking over? Okay. It's good to clarify. Then that's great. That's great. We're going to get peak Robin here. Mazen Chami is a senior software engineer here at Infinite Red. He lives in Durham, North Carolina. Former pro soccer player and coach. And, of course, co-host here at React Native Radio. How's it going, Mazen?
Good. Excited for spring, although it's rainy today.
Yeah. Well, it snowed today. My kids are actually home for a snow day because there's a dusting of snow. Everybody in the Midwest is like, are you serious? Like a dusting of snow keeps you home. But
it's the same here. If snow is in the forecast for like next week, we'll shut down. That's fine.
Yeah.
The grocery stores are empty.
I'm just seeing flakes starting to fall outside our house.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, we're a little bit north of you, Robin. So sometimes it's a little different.
I was listening on the radio that your schools were closed, but not ours yet.
Yeah, that's the thing is that's another thing. Like people from out east, or Midwest or whatever, come over here and just make fun of us, and then they go out and drive and they crash because the reality is that our snow is slippery. It's like it's really slick. You get like this like hard like ice everywhere, and also none of anything is set up for it. So yeah, it happens. Our guest today is Josh Justice. Josh was a former co-host of this. I actually did a few episodes with you, Josh, back in the day before we acquired React Native Radio. So that's kind of fun to have you back on the program after oh boy, it's been probably a couple of years now, something like that. And Josh Justice has worked as a developer for 17 years across mobile, front end, and back end platforms. He currently serves as the web platform lead at Big Nerd Ranch, a web and mobile development shop in Atlanta, Georgia. He also writes, speaks, and live streams about React Native, testing, and other software topics. It's kind of actually fun because Josh also taught a testing workshop at Chain React. When was that? Was it 2018 or something like that? It was 2019?
I think it's 2019 because I attended in 2018 and then got that opportunity in 2019.
The last time we had Chain. We'll have it again someday.
Yeah, it's coming back sometime, but oh man, yeah, it'll be great. And hopefully we can get you back for another workshop, Josh, because it was fantastic. I think, Mazen, you were in that workshop before you worked at Infinite Red, right?
Yes, I was. I kind of specifically went to Chain React for that workshop, and I can say that I came out of it understanding a lot of React Native and how to test in React Native, which was great.
So yeah, thanks so much for the encouragement, y'all. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing it. First workshop I've done, and yeah, I would love to do it again next time Chain React is back.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we get into our topic, this episode is sponsored by Infinite Red. We are a premier React Native design and development agency located fully remote in the US and Canada. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next React Native project, hit us up. You can learn more on our website, infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast, but don't mention Josh because Big Nerd Ranch might be mad about that. We are hiring. We hire very rarely. We actually did just pick up a couple of new developers, which I'm very excited about. But we are still hiring a couple more. So if you're a senior level React Native engineer located in the US or Canada, go to careers.infinite.red. All right, let's get into our topic for today. The topic is building an Expo app for mobile and web. And that was the title of a talk that Josh gave at React Atlanta, the meetup in December, I think it was, a few months ago anyway.
Yes.
And you used Expo. And what's kind of interesting, this caught our eye. And what's kind of interesting about this is not only that you built an app with Expo, obviously that's interesting, but also that you built it for mobile and web. And there were some learnings that kind of came out of that, which are really interesting. You built an app called Surely, and the source code is available on your GitHub, and we'll link to that in the show notes here. But can you start off by explaining a bit about what was it that you built? What is Surely?
Yeah, Surely is a to-do list app. I've noticed over the years, different friends of mine, people have one type of utility app often that they're really a nerd about. I could care less about calendar apps. Some people need a very specific calendar app. I could care less about email apps. Some people really care. For me, it's to-dos. I absolutely live out of my to-do list app. And what I found was that the to-do list apps that I was using weren't quite fit for just what I wanted. I actually wanted less features. I had never read the Getting Things Done books, but some people who have shared ideas from them talked about the idea that you don't want it to be easy to reschedule a bunch of to-dos. You don't want to be organizing to-dos. You want to be finishing them or deleting them. And so I wanted to build an app that really was targeted down just the needs that I had for to-do tracking. And one of the nice things about the high level of abstraction that Expo provides is I didn't need to do it as a business. I didn't need to try to make money on it. I could really make an app for myself very easily, pretty quickly, and then offer it for free because I don't need to make any money off of it. And so I'm happy to kind of make that available, especially if there's anything interesting for folks about deploying for mobile and for web that they can glean from that source code.
So you really took the to-do list example app to like the next level.
Yeah, that is the hilarious thing, that it is the canonical example, and yet it's like, nope, I do really need it.
The world needs another to-do list app.
So when we were trying to decide what topic to talk about, and I came across this video of yours, Josh, it was actually the time when I was evaluating other to-do list apps because I am a to-do list fanatic. If you were to come to our house, you'll see a to-do list in every room, on every piece of paper, on every board. And over the years, we've had like 4 or 5 apps that have just to-do lists all over the place. And I actually tried Surely, and Surely was really good because it was just simple, to the point, and it was just really easy to follow. Most to-do apps are just convoluted. Like there's too many steps and hoops to jump through, and all you need is just a list to get through and move on to the next thing, kind of thing.
Means a lot that a to-do list nerd would overlap that way. And other to-do list nerds, like they might want something slightly different, and that's okay as well. I mean, that's another thing about, I've been thinking about this idea of personal software, creating software for yourself. And when you work in our industry, and if and when you have like the free time and interest in it, we have that opportunity. And because I can make an app that's really targeted at my use case, and I don't need to go broader and broader for a feature set that appeals to everybody, I can reach a point where it's done. I would say that Surely is feature complete. And if Mazen or others have ideas, requests, or PRs they want to put in, that's fine as well. But it's really great to be at a point where it's like I don't have this big backlog that I feel like I always have more to do on it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's nice that Expo makes it so easy to build something just on your own for yourself.
For sure.
So could you describe the stack you used? Because that's kind of obviously one of the more interesting things to our audience here. What did you use to build it?
Obviously Expo.
Yes, obviously Expo. Although that was part of the evaluation. I was trying to think, and actually this is a rewrite of the front end from another JavaScript technology. But the reason I ended up with React Native and Expo is this. I found that I needed the web case because on a desktop computer, I need to pull up the to-dos on there. And I was using it on the web on my phone, but I found that I'm in there so much, I really just live out of my to-do list app, that the niceties, the experience of a mobile app really was going to add a lot of benefit to me. And so that's what got me interested in looking into React Native for web. So that's the general library that allows you to write React Native code and deploy it to the web environment. I wanted to see how it was doing. It's been around for a few years now. And then I saw that Expo was actually the recommended way that they have. If you don't have an existing app and you want to build with React Native for web, Expo is the recommended way to do it. And gave it a try. It ran really well. So other things in the stack, I really wanted to go for a high level of abstraction. And so I'm not a designer. make the worst design sense. And so I really wanted to use a component library. And I've heard great things about React Native Paper, and they said they had great web support, and it's absolutely worked out well that way. React Navigation, pretty much the standard, has worked out great on web as well, including handling URLs. So as you navigate around on the web, the path, the URL changes. If you reload the page or copy and paste a link and you're logged into your to-do account, those will come up just fine. There was some few tricks there, just figuring out exactly how to do the configuration, but it worked really well. And, as a Expo app, all the normal data layer options you would want were available. I've ended up going with a REST API using a JSON API format. But in Expo for web, GraphQL would work just as well, or any other kind of data layer you might want.
You mentioned React Native Paper. Did you evaluate others? And if not, when choosing React Native Paper, you went with it, I'm guessing, because you had mentioned it was really easy to plug in with React Navigation. Now, did you have to do any specific customization to it?
So over the years on personal and professional React Native projects, React Native Paper and React Elements, or React Native Elements, I think it's called React Native Elements, were two that have been around and really well established for a long time. And so I've looked at those over the years. React Native Paper was really appealing to me because of just how comprehensive Google's material design system is. And I actually saw with React Navigation that there was documentation on how to integrate that with React Native Paper so that, you're using the elements from React Native Paper that work well with the look and feel, and it just feels very natural together. And that works really great. So I think I've been leaning towards material design across different frameworks and apps that I use, because it's so popular that there's a material design library for everything, and it just plain CSS if you need it. And so that's just some of the factors that led me towards React Native Paper. But elements or other libraries might work just as well for deploying to the web and mobile. But this high level of abstraction was the perfect fit for my use case.
I have heard Google is either revamping or changing up material design. So there's some new things coming to material design. I forget. I think they're trying to align it better with some iOS related items. So there's some convergence happening there between Android and iOS. So when you went with React Native Paper, did you have to do anything really custom, or is it very easy to just essentially pull it out of the box and use it that way? Use it as is and maybe, add in your styling or theming?
Almost everything I needed was available out of the box with React Native Paper. There were some places that I used bare React Native views for layout, Flexbox. And there's a few cases where there was something else that I needed, where I found a third-party component. There's a date picker that I use, a React Native date picker, or I built my own out of paper pieces. For example, I wanted a drop-down, and like a real literal drop-down was going to be a really good fit. And so I used a React Native Paper button and a menu together, and that worked really well.
Awesome.
How often did you have to just like straight up build something from scratch, like not even using React Native Paper components, if ever? Did you even have to do that?
Just about the only thing I had to build from scratch was just setting up responsive design layout of things. When I think about the style sheet stuff that I used, it was all about layout. Even things as simple as text and titles. React Native Paper has elements there that are styled with the fonts and the sizes that align with material design. So it is a funny contrast, actually, because at the same time I was working on a professional project that was based on material design. The designer we work with was designing off of material design. We started out with React Native Paper, but it turns out we weren't able to use very much of it at all. Mm-hmm. By the time we took that library out, it was literally just the divider, which is a 1 pixel line. Just because, it was adhering to the spec as far as I could tell, drop shadows, elevations, and everything like that. But they were just going for the tappable things. Buttons was just not quite like that.
Yeah.
The high level of abstraction that React Native Paper provides. But for me, as not a designer who wants out of the box components just to drop in for that personal project, works great. And I definitely recommend it for projects where you don't have a designer. You just want it to look and work well together.
We've had pretty much an identical experience where we were trying to use, it wasn't React Native Paper, it was UI Kitten, but trying to use a UI component library like that, but also with the design team. And they kept designing things that were just different enough that you couldn't make the
not our design team.
Right. No, sorry, it wasn't our design team. It was our client's design team, but it was just different enough that we couldn't really like force the component library components to work. And so we didn't end up using it as much as we could have. But those libraries are absolutely fantastic when you're trying to sort of do it all and you just need stuff that's already designed and works well.
In the video, you mentioned that you didn't release this for Android because you ran into a dependency bug. So this is actually a very good example of when, some platforms might not work well with specific React Native libraries. We might think some of them are just pure JavaScript, but it sounds like this one might not have been. Can you go into what that was, what the dependency was?
Yeah, it comes out of taking this approach of trying to assemble these high-level things together. There can be cases where there's a mismatch. In this case, the React Native paper dates library, it gives me like full screen date picker, calendars, all the complexity like that works really, really great. It's made to look great with React Native paper, even down to dark mode and everything like that, handles it perfectly. But it intentionally says in there, hey, we use the dates.intl APIs. They're available on iOS. They're available on Android in React Native 66 with Hermes. And Expo is, as of today, is still on 64. And so there were some workarounds with some polyfills, and I could have looked into those to try to get those working. But it was at the point where it's like, I am going to be using this on iOS and on the web, not directly on Android. I don't have, I'm not marketing this. I don't have users banging down my door. My contact info is there. So if any of y'all are surely users, please let me know.
Pull requests are open.
Yeah. So it was like, I could always pull this in at any time, try these polyfills. I did a quick try to see, maybe I don't need to use that library for the dates, maybe some other kind of date picker. So I gave it a quick try with a different one, and it was looking complex. And it was enough where it's like, hey, you know what? We're very close. We could get there, but it's just not something that I want to prioritize right now. So for a professional project, it would not present an obstacle. You could get it configured, or you could take another approach to dates. I mean, if you are working with those high level components, you're going to probably want to be flexible and to say, okay, yep, the date picker is going to look different on Android because we need to be on Expo. You kind of choose what you're going to pick. Do we want to have an off the shelf date picker, or do we want to have Expo and all the high level niceties that it provides? Or do we want to not be on Android? And, depending on your business, your side project, you're going to choose a different option amongst those.
Awesome.
But other than that, as I've walked through it, running on the emulator, I was developing just about the whole time on the Android emulator, having it running up side by side with the web browser and with iOS, seeing things working. And that was the only thing that I found that came up with Android. Everything else was working perfectly for all those libraries together.
It's a pretty magical experience when you can just change a line of code and see it update on 3 platforms.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a bit about what's under the hood that makes all of this work. So Expo Web uses React Native Web. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. The name of the NPM dependency is React Native Web with dashes. On the title on their page, they say React Native for Web, which makes it even harder for me to talk about.
I know, it is
how
hard.
do I be clear as I can?
It's hard to talk about. It's also hard to Google.
Yeah, no kidding.
So React Native Paper also supports React Native Web. Is that how their components work for both platforms?
Right. Yeah, they officially support web, and I haven't pulled up to see exactly how they describe it. But basically, if you have a React Native web app, React Native for web app, and you're using React Native Paper in it, then those components just work. In the running in development mode or building out the web assets, those React Native Paper components will look well and be styled properly in a browser.
We've talked about React Native Web on the show before, but for our listeners who might not know, can you just really briefly explain the concept behind React Native Web and how it works?
Absolutely. I struggle with that for a long time, but I think I've got it quick, and the listeners can decide if they agree or not. So when you think about React, you're building components and you're writing the actual HTML tags, the DOM elements in JSX, div, anchor, whatever. React Native, we're deploying to mobile, which is different, but also we're not putting in tags for exactly what is happening on iOS or on Android. If you've ever done native development to see the names of those UI elements on there, there's an abstraction. And so React Native's view and React Native's text and those other things are an abstraction over those lower level implementations. And so what React Native for web does is it makes the web another abstraction that you could target with the same things. So your app built with React Native texts and views and flat lists or other components built on top of them deploys out and turns into DOM elements under the hood, just like it turns into Android-specific UI elements or iOS-specific UI elements. So it's an additional level of abstraction away from what's really happening in the web browser to put it on parallel with exactly what's already happening on iOS and on Android and on many other platforms that React Native has been applied to. So that one step away from the HTML is probably the simplest way to think about how React Native for web works.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. That's my understanding as well. That we're taking the abstraction that React Native gives you and just applying it to one more place, which is, I mean, that's what React Native is all about, right? Write once, run anywhere.
Exactly. I joke, I've joked about this before on the podcast, but React Native Web is what React.js should have been, where you have that layer of abstraction and then you hit the platforms rather than putting divs and spans and platform-specific elements right into the framework itself.
It's almost a shame they happened in the order that they did, because if React Native had come first.
I don't actually feel like maybe React Native Web would have made it though. Like React.js Web made sense because people are like, well, you just write HTML in it,
Even though it's not HTML.
Not HTML.
So one question, and I think you highlighted in the video, React Native Web is not very accessible. And I think you mentioned when translating it to web components, it usually just does a div with a role. So those of us that know like accessibility, like that's something that's very important. And having a div with a role of button, or we would be looking for an anchor tag to help us know that this is a link. Accessibility won't necessarily work that great using this translation. What can a user do to help, work with the same stack to make their development experience easy and simple to deliver the product, but also make it accessible for all users out there?
Yeah, thanks for going there, Mazen. I think that was when Jamon was talking about the benefits, the upsides of React Native for web. Like that's the main trade-off that I had in mind that I wanted to get to. I think, and it's important for listeners to keep in mind, I've worked on React Native for web on a hobby. And so that's the amount of effort that I put into it. In a professional context, there may be workarounds. There may be ways to make all that work to get just the right HTML elements you want. And would love to have some future guests fill us in more about that or blog about it. That would be great to hear. But out of the box, in the basic and the most straightforward use case where you're using those abstractions from React Native, view, text, etc., you are going to get DOM elements that are maybe not what you expect. Another example would be, if you want to use those HTML5 sections like header and footer and main and nav, which I never really used until I started getting into accessibility tooling. And it was explaining to me and pointing me to those WCAG points about how those sections help screen readers and others. That's when I learned about those things and have been trying to apply those. And yet those don't automatically come out of the box with React Native for web. And it wasn't clear to me upon initially looking how to get them in there. Even if there is a way, it's still not going to be the default as in the same way as when you're writing DOM-related, HTML tag-related JSX. And so it's an interesting difference, an interesting distinction. On the flip side, on the accessibility, one thing that does work great in Surely, based on all these libraries, is screen reader labels. So I've actually been experiencing some wrist strain for the last few years. And one of the things that I've been reaching for is a macOS and iOS feature called voice control. It uses the accessibility labels on elements, kind of the opposite of a screen reader. It lets me speak what I want to tap on that I see using that accessibility label, and then it interacts with it. And that actually works great with React Native Web and even React Native Paper. I've been able to do that. I made a pull request to that React Native Paper dates to make a small tweak to make that work out well. And, happy to be someone who represents, hey, I have a use case for accessibility labels. Let's make this different. And then folks that use screen readers are going to benefit from that as well. So that side of accessibility does work really well. But if you are on the web and you really want to make sure you as in compliance as possible, some things might not be achievable. Some things might be a pull request to React Native for web, and you need to get down into the guts to it. I know one particular thing, I was surprised to see that pressables in React Native are divs with a role of button. It's like, well, we got button tags. Why can't we use a button tag? Yeah. Well, I found the issue, the GitHub issue, where they track that in a certain browser, in certain scenarios, there's display issues with buttons and limitations on what can be displayed in them. And so now, hey, you're writing the HTML yourself, use a button unless you have that edge case. But for an abstraction like this, they have to code something that's not going to break in those cases.
So that's one of those things about the web, is that it represents itself as a single platform, but it's really not, because each browser is kind of its own platform.
What do you mean? You don't use IE?
No. I enjoy my life.
going back big picture to how this relates to kind of preferring React Native for web, I feel like really talking to people about whether you should reach for this architecture, the main question that comes to mind for me that I ask them is, do you want the same app on web, on mobile, or is it a different app for the same business or service? If all the screens are the same, if all the features are the same, I mean, there's going to be responsive design for tablets as well as for web browsers. But if all the functionality generally, 90% or more is the same, great. As a contrast, the client project I was on recently, they had a pre-existing React web app and they were building a React Native app. And it was the same service, same needs and uses, but intentionally, I mean, the layout was different screens. They were okay with the fact that some features were on one and not on the other. And so if there's going to be a lot of differences, or maybe it's different audiences, the mobile app is for your customers and the web app is for your customer support reps, when there's going to be a lot of differences there and not a lot of shared screens and UI elements, the cost of that layer of abstraction is going to get in your way. And so if they're fairly different anyway, I think probably building a separate React Native app, even an Expo app, and a React web app can still be a benefit. I mean, it's so easy to hire for React for web. There's so many folks that are directly experienced with it. You're going to be able to target web browser DOM element stuff directly. And there's still options for code sharing, like shared libraries for your data layer, for your JavaScript layer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And this is a lot of times, people will say, should I use React Native Web? And it's very much it depends situation. We have been in situations, though, where Robin actually worked on a project where we did share components, but we didn't share necessarily the
Right.
shelf,
It wasn't the same application. It was two applications that used a lot of shared components and code. And that was made possible by React Native Web because we were building React Native components that we could then use on the web.
We'd literally sprinkle them in as needed.
Right. But they were really, at their core, two separate applications with different screens and different layouts.
And we could, of course, share a lot of the business logic and things like that, which was helpful, data modeling and, back-end communication and that sort of thing. But there's always, you're not going to get away from that unless you're literally building the same app in web and iOS and Android. It's kind of interesting. It's one of the things that kind of came to mind as you were talking about this, Josh, was what if Android was not, very similar to iOS or vice versa, however you want to look at it. What if they what if they weren't just totally like competing platforms and instead, most people had, this alternate universe, most people had an Android tablet that was usually landscape and an iPhone, like the iPad had never been invented or something. And instead of targeting, iOS and Android phones in a portrait, kind of setup here, you had to do iOS there and Android as like a tablet. And then you had web, which was different as well. That like kind of illustrates that we kind of take for granted that an iPhone, the audience can't see this, but I have an iPhone and an Android in my hand, both of them. And they look kind of similar. Like if I were to just kind of like swipe it through the screen, you'd be like, okay, which one was which, right? Because they're kind of like at first glance, they're kind of similar. But it's kind of an interesting, thought experiment. What would happen there?
I've never actually thought about that before. I will say thank you to Google and Apple for competing with each other because it makes my job easier.
And stealing ideas from each other and all that. It does make our lives easier.
So I think as we're talking about how similar or not so similar in some pitfalls with accessibility, you highlight React Native's platform API and how that is the platform.os, which returns iOS, Android, web, and I think it was Mac OS and Windows or something like that. And I think you actually use it very well with the storage setup using async storage versus local storage. People can watch the video and hear the asterisks about that comment. Is there anything you want to highlight about how the platform API kind of makes it either easy or actually probably harder to develop using this single repo for web and mobile?
Yeah, for my case, the platform API worked really well because my app is so far on the extreme towards it is the same app on iOS, Android, and web. And so there's very few conditionals in there. There's something like the web has a link to the App Store button. We don't need the App Store button in the iOS app. some APIs that are available on, I think on iOS, we can pop up the App Store review, whereas on the web, we just link you to somewhere to put in a review. And then you mentioned the storage setup where Expo Storage provides mobile options, not for the web. So I wrapped it and figured out an option for storage on the web. So yeah, just with just a few conditionals for that, it worked out really well. It's another thing to think about, though, as far as evaluating your app. The more platform checks you have to make things very different on the web, the more you want to think about it. And I love the architecture that Robin mentioned. That's a nice best of both worlds that I haven't run across before, and it seems really great. But you just want to think about, is there very few differences, or are there going to be, half and half? Is it mostly differences on all the different platforms? At a certain point, if there's conditional spread all throughout your app, at some point it maybe you have different screens at the outer level rather than conditionals. But yeah, for my app was so far towards the extreme that those very few platform conditionals worked out really well.
Yeah, it sounds like if you want that level of sharing, for them to basically be the same app, you have to intentionally design it that way from scratch, which is what you got to do because you built it from scratch.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Robin, because that makes me think about client project that I was on recently. We had separate designs made for iOS and for Android. And so the designers were coming in with slightly different visions that matched those different platforms. And so that could proliferate into conditionals around the size of margins and things like that. And that could kind of go all over the place. And I'm sure there are conditionals inside of React Native Paper that are handling some of those differences as well to get things to look up just right, whether they need to show identically on the two platforms and on the web, or they're supposed to look differently.
I've worked on a project before very similar to that where my component was just a conditional, platform.os is iOS, return this component.
Render this one. Otherwise, render this one.
Exactly. And the sole reason was like the styling and the look and feel that it didn't make sense to have that platform.os throughout a one component when instead two components were just smaller files, easier to maintain.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because since React Native sort of came on the scene, that's one of the biggest criticisms of it, right? Is that Android and iOS are different and you should be developing different applications for each of those. But I think as it's been around longer, people are starting to value the efficiency of building for both at the same time over whatever different UX traditions there are for these two those traditions start to seem a little bit more arbitrary when you could say, well, why would you make them different if you could make them the same?
So one topic I want to talk about, and mainly because I attended your testing workshop, is based around testing. I see you integrated a lot of tests in your app, and I love that whole when in the video you kind of ran a test and you just kind of see everything flying through the screen and passing. That's such a good feeling. Can you just talk about what you used for testing? I know you mentioned Cypress, I believe it was, for your end-to-end testing. And I remember from the workshop, there was stuff like Detox and Appium or other resources out there. So do you mind just kind of talking about testing in general for this experience with a web and mobile app?
Love to talk about testing. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So in general, I love to have tests at different levels of abstraction. So, low-level unit tests, if you just have standalone functions with logic, test those. Testing components at higher or lower levels of granularity, and then end-to-end tests. So on React Native, Detox is a great option for end-to-end testing. It actually doesn't officially support Expo as of the last time I checked. And so I've sort of leaned away from it from Expo projects. And even on React Native CLI projects, I was having more and more trouble over the time for my little side projects and personal training stuff, getting the build setup working. It's getting things to build through iOS and Android is complicated. It's hard when you're using the CLI and at those native layers. So I don't begrudge them that. But that was sort of challenging. But it clicked for me that because I have the same app going to mobile and to web, and Cypress works great for end-to-end testing on the web, I could test this with Cypress. And that gives me a high level of confidence for things that do work the same across the platforms. So if all those tools are working well, then if the Cypress test pass on the web, I have a pretty high degree of confidence that things work on mobile as well. Now, when I've got one of the biggest things I use these tests for, because Surely is now feature complete, is to cover dependency updates. When Dependabot opens a PR for a new dependency update, and for something like Lodash or date functions, test pass, I click accept. For something that's updating React navigation, I want to run that locally to see it working because I want to see it actually work on iOS as well because there's native code going on there that Cypress isn't going to be exercising. Interestingly, just in the last month or so, a Cypress update started erroring out for me, and I was digging into what's going on here. And so I was, if we would have done this a month ago, I would have been like, Cypress, React Native for web testing, perfect, go for it. I got a little dose of reality. Mm-hmm. What was going on, to the degree I can figure it out, is Cypress is checking some things about the way the navigation works in the browser. And React Navigation running on web is doing some things about the navigation on the browser that work fine for end users, but conflicts with what Cypress is looking for. But on both sides, it's not like Googling the error, like neither of them, it's not clear to me what's going on. So in a sense, there's implementation details under the hood of those two that are conflicting. And so I decided that I could work through it if I really wanted to, put a lot of effort into it. But I decided, I think I'm going to scale back to React Native Testing Library, which is the component testing library for React Native. Because I realized, and this is a technique from that client project as well, we wanted to use React Native Testing Library to test each screen by itself. Because React Navigation works with there's native code involved and stuff like that. But if you take one of your screens that React Navigation renders for you, all underneath there, that's all React Native code you control. And you can stub out the native stuff like usual. So I've been taking my screens one at a time, starting with the ones that were erroring out, and converting them over. So now instead of confirming that I've successfully navigated to another page with this URL, I just confirmed that I stub out React Navigation, I confirmed that the right link to or the right navigate function is called, past the right arguments. So now whenever you think about testing styles like this, you think about what are you gaining, what are you losing? I'm gaining in that I'm not coupled to those implementation details of React Navigation and Cypress anymore. What I'm losing is a bit of realism. I don't know that when I make that call to React Navigation, I know React Navigation works well, but have I set it up such a way that that's going to succeed on web and on mobile, and that I'm using the same string name for the route that it's actually configured as? So I'm a bit more reliant on manual testing. And because my app is small, it's like, I'm going to go through the screens. That's going to be fine. For a professional environment, even if you are using Cypress for a lot of your screens or React Native Testing Library for a lot of your screens, I'd recommend automating one detox or one Appium test or a few just as a smoke test, just to confirm that the iOS, the Android can build, basic screens can come up, maybe one very important flow. So you can get a lot of complementary help by getting assurance from just having one or a few Appium tests passing, but more Cypress tests, and even more than that, React Native Testing Library and lower level tests.
That's awesome. Thanks for that explanation.
Perfect. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Josh, I would love to chat more about this, but in the meantime, people can go check out your talk, which we will link to, and it's fantastic. I highly recommend watching it. Even if you've listened to this episode, I think it's good to watch the talk. It's on YouTube. You can go check out shirleytodo.com. And also there is a GitHub source, which we'll link to. Josh, in your bio, you say you do live streaming. Where do you do that?
Yeah, I live stream on Twitch. And so I'll give you the link for this new Twitch series that I've got starting up. But folks can also get to it. Codingitwrong.com is my main homepage, and you can hear about anything that I'm working on there. But Perfect. I've been off and on in Twitch streaming, but starting as Twitch series to convert another app over to Expo with React Native for web. So if anyone's interested in this, it's great to follow along step by step and see me putting it into place. I would be happy to have anyone join.
You guys need to collaborate.
I was thinking the same thing. I've been Twitch streaming as well at rn.live. That just goes to my Twitch stream. And we need to do a collab, Josh. It'd be a lot of fun. The world needs more React Native content, especially if you're doing any of that React Native stuff. I'd love to have you on or go on yours.
Absolutely.
We are at the end of the program, unfortunately. Where can people find you, Robin, online?
I'm on Twitter at Robin_Hines with an E at the end.
Mazen
Chami.
And I'm at Jamon Holmgren. Josh, I don't think you're using Twitter anymore. You decided to take a break from it, right?
Yeah, I was heavy on Twitter and then I was off Twitter. So codingitwrong.com.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I don't blame you. And also we're all worse off for not having you on there, but I get it. I totally get it. But certainly codingitwrong.com is a good place to find you. You can find React Native Radio at React Native RDIO. You can also join our community.infinite.red. We have over 2,000 React Native developers in there. It's very active. People ask questions and answer questions in there. It's fantastic. Thanks, Josh, for coming on. As always, thanks to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor and episode release coordinator, Jed Bartosky, our social media coordinator, Missy Warren, our designer, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. Special thanks to, obviously, all of you for listening today. We all really appreciate it. We also appreciate it when you hit us up on Twitter. It's been happening more often lately where people are like, hey, I love React Native Radio. And it's always really nice to see that we're not shouting into the void, which sometimes it feels like, that you're all hanging out with us. And, we can feel your presence now. So really appreciate it. Reminder, we are hiring React Native engineers. If you're senior level React Native engineer located in the US or Canada and you want to work for, plug your ears, Josh, the best React Native agency in the world, go to careers.infinite.red. We'll see you all next time.